So, embrace the uncharted. Let me start by asking you all, have you ever seen an intimacy scene? Was the first ever intimacy scene you saw in your living room with your parents? Was the first intimacy scene you saw on a date, maybe in a movie theater? Or was the first ever intimacy scene you saw on your friend's mobile phone? Did you wonder how these scenes are shot? I know I did, and I've been asked this question many, many times. So, I stand here before you, a trailblazer of sorts, or so I'm told, in embodying this profession that I don't think existed before 2018 in the world. So, it was an extremely interesting space to kind of enter, the intimacy coordinator. What are intimacy coordinators? Or, well, intimacy coordinators and directors, as some people will like to call themselves, are specialists of scenes of intimacy, essentially in order to execute scenes of intimacy while making sure that directors and performers have clear and honest communication, which fosters a relationship of honesty and allows for essentially an above board system on a film set. So what are these scenes of intimacy? Scenes of intimacy include, but are not limited to, scenes that have nudity, simulated sex, kissing, physical examinations, groping over the clothing, simulated sexual harassment, hypersexualization of body parts when shot on screen, for example, in item songs, stories about minorities like the LGBTQIA plus community, stories that involve physical familial interaction, like when family members have physical interaction with one another, or friends do, of course, wherever relevant within the scope of intimacy. Fun fact, all of the intimacy that you see on screen that has been shot in India is simulated, because no real sex acts are allowed to be shot on screen. And as I say this, it seems so obvious because it's porn, and that's illegal. Okay, so let me take you back for just 1 second to 2017. Every person in the room here today that had any possible access to press, to social media, to world news, would have heard about this huge movement that kind of took a lot of industries worldwide up by a storm. It was called the Me Too movement. And very closely after, a far tinier but extremely important #HimToo movement, in case, and again, something that hadn't been heard much, but did exist. These movements were essentially there because these movements essentially took place because they were shedding light on the sexual and workplace harassment that was taking place within the industries. So as a result of these movements, the world spoke of prevention and redressal committees. HR in multiple organizations wanted to put down policies and had seminars in order to deal with this huge situation of harassment that came to the forefront. Company policies changed, and how they dealt with cases of harassment in the workplace completely changed. India too went through the Me Too movement. Studios, production houses came up with legal hotlines. They held seminars on harassment, just like most workplaces outside of this industry. But here's what seems to have missed a lot of people: human nature. They seem to have missed that most of what they were doing was reactive, and it wasn't proactive. Don't you think prevention is better than cure? You can fire somebody, you can take away their job, you can cancel them online, you can slap them with 100 penalties, right? And you can do much more. But what about the people that have already suffered the harassment? What about the trauma that the survivor has to live with? And for those reasons, a lot of people say, but we do seminars, right? They're supposed to address the issue. But let's be real. More often than not, they barely scratch the surface. And they seem very performative, as though legal and HR have kind of put them into place to show that they care. How many of you have actually been to one of these consent and boundary and sexual harassment seminars? I'm going to look for a show of hands here. Okay, wow, that's a lot of people. Okay, all I'm going to say is, today think about what it is you took back from that seminar and how it altered the way that you behave today, and whether or not it was as impactful as it was meant to be. All of these conversations were happening while the Me Too movement was going on, not just within the industry, but also outside of the industry. I come from a family which has absolutely nothing to do with the films. And so I come from a society that looks upon films as an audience, as opposed to looking upon films from within, or the industry from within. As most people who look at it from an audience perspective, the good looks really good and shiny, and the bad becomes a great topic for conversation. So I was here, this 26-year-old assistant director, very largely impacted by these conversations and how it was being portrayed and perceived by society. I was distraught at the way that my workplace was being made out to be. It was being made out to be unsafe. And I mean, I think at that time in my life, I was also very hungry for change. I was unfulfilled as an assistant director, but I didn't know where to take my life. I knew I wanted to make an impact, but I didn't know what, and I didn't know how. And which is why this thought comes to mind. Someone very wise once told me, they said that if your purpose is if your career is more important than your purpose, then it is the job you do. But if your purpose becomes more important than your career, then it becomes your calling. And in that moment, I think I'd found my calling. With this work, I knew it was my calling. And what reiterated this for me was my experience on this Netflix show that I worked on called Class. It was a show that allowed for me to deal with very new actors that were kind of figuring out what acting and being on a film set and then doing intimacy scenes felt like. And an extremely tight team that allowed for me to truly do everything in my power to follow every protocol that I possibly could. And then in turn, a place for me to actually see intimacy work flourish. It made me realize that my work marries three of my very favorite subjects. Those three subjects are filmmaking or performance art, law, and psychology. Is this me breathing bothering y'all? I feel like it's very loud to me. Is this better? Okay. All right. So, filmmaking. Filmmaking is basically an art which allows you to tell a story to an audience that helps the audience evoke some form of emotion while getting entertained. And the story can still be told with performance and visuals without it being true to the performer or the storyteller. Law, which is the legality of how something can be told, whether or not a story is safe to be told, whether or not the characters or the performers are safe in telling that story, and of course the gender and sexual harassment that takes place in a workspace. So to prevent that. Psychology. Understanding trauma, triggers, and the vulnerability of the cast and crew during the scenes of intimacy, and also understanding how a certain gaze or a point of view in telling a story can affect the audiences that that story is being told to and society at large. So my role as an intimacy coordinator centers around education and inclusion. And in the Indian film industry, surprisingly, inclusivity and representation is still a work in progress. And that leaves several voices unheard. So, recognizing this, we must collaborate in amplifying these voices and telling these unique stories. I think it's also important to check our own privilege in telling these stories so that we're not further feeding into the audience's preconceived notions or biases around the society that we're kind of reflecting. See, films and society feed off of each other. So this reminds me, a very close friend of mine, Sushant Divgikar, and I wonder if you all know her as Rani Kohinoor, always says that if we're telling a story about the community in order to uplift the community or to make sure that we are recognizing the community, the first step would be to hire somebody from the community to tell that story. There was actually a reel that she did a little while ago. And it was hilarious. And I'm definitely not as funny as her, but I'll say it because the point made me move. Um, she said, if a trans person can't play a male role, and a trans person can't play a female role, and you don't hire a trans person to play a trans role, so what are trans people supposed to do? Are they supposed to be trans trees in the background? I know she's better at delivering it, but that really made me laugh and also taught me a lot in that moment. Um, which again, I remembered when I saw Trinetra Haldar Gummuraju as a protagonist in Made in Heaven season 2. And all I could think to myself is, at least Zoya Akhtar is moving in the correct direction. So, as the first ever intimacy coordinator, I have embarked on this road less traveled, venturing into uncertainty and fear, and territories that were filled with all the possible heebie-jeebies that one could imagine happening to them. It is through understanding the um, importance of these unfamiliar spaces and feeling alone in the work that I was doing is the time that I truly learned to value the importance of what it is I do. And it is in that time that I realized that there needed to be a dream. There needed to be a dream for a more inclusive storytelling space, and there needed to be action. And there needed to be action in a much more inclusive and a much more diverse film industry. And I hope we achieve that if we haven't yet, which we know we haven't, hopefully soon. Thank you.